Hello everyone, welcome back. I thought I would do a reading wrap-up today, and I think I have 4 books to talk about, and hopefully it won't take all that long. So, the first book is the Encyclopedia of Urban Legends. This is by Harald Brunvand, and I've had this book for about 20 years now. And I don't think that I ever read this all the way through until about 5 years ago. And I actually forgot about having read it all the way through, I suppose just because I've had this for so long and I've been picking over it. And so I read through it all the way through this time. And I didn't really intend to. I talked about this in a tag about 2 or 3 weeks ago and said it was one of the books you might read if you wanted to get a better understanding of me. And that's because I love urban legends. I love myths and cryptids and UFOs and all kinds of stuff like that. I have ever since I was a kid. I don't particularly believe in any of it. I think it's almost all of it is urban legend, right? I think some people have seen some weird things. Maybe they didn't know how to explain them. But with urban legends, this reread for me was really kind of eye-opening because I just really understood for this time how so many urban legends are just mean-spirited, how they are born out of like xenophobia, racism, that sort of thing, contempt for other people, making fun of people, and making fun of, say, the ignorance of some people or the perceived ignorance of some people. But there are also urban legends that are warnings against certain things, warnings against, say, spending your money the wrong way, or against little things that people might do without even thinking about them. I'm trying a new tripod here. It's not a new tripod, it's actually older than I am, but it has like a tilt head so you can push the camera towards you, and I don't know, I just thought I would try it. I actually bought it to do like close-up pictures of flowers and things like that. Anyway, just if things seem a little different, that's why. I don't know if I'll keep this set up, probably not. I just wanted to try something different. But urban legends are really interesting. There are all kinds of different urban legends. There are urban legends about vanishing hitchhikers, about dresses that were on corpses that are sold for girls who go to the prom and the formaldehyde soaks into them and they die. That's the poison dress. There are urban legends about mistakes people make when they go on vacation. Here's the sawed-off fingers. The sawed-off fingers is about a guy who works in a factory and he gets his fingers cut off. And they are asking him, like, how did you do it? And he says, like this, and he sticks his other fingers in the machine, and it cuts them off, too. So some of them are funny. Of course, there's, like, the hook, about the couple out in the car, and they drive away, and the hook is stuck on the door handle. Wouldn't work on today's cars, I don't suppose. But this is an encyclopedia, so it is set up in an encyclopedic form. So you just get these short entries about a story or about a country, the urban legends of different countries, about the folklorists who are collecting urban legends around this time. So this is from 2001. I bought this edition probably 2003, 2004, something like that. Here's law legends, for instance, different categories of legends. And Harald Brunvand has provided us also with references to his own works. So he wrote quite a few books over the years, but there are also references to other people's work. There's the finger in the pickle jar, about a factory worker whose finger gets cut off and left in the pickles, and somebody opens it. And there's like the Kentucky Fried Rat, which is about a rat that falls in the deep fryer and then winds up in somebody's bucket of chicken. I really enjoyed this reread, but the way that this is set up, it's not meant to be read from cover to cover, so it does get quite repetitive because you will encounter these legends multiple different times in say, an entry under a country and then an entry under a different category of legends, and then just the legend itself, and you might encounter it just over and over and over. But it's pretty good, and if you're interested in urban legends, this might be for you, because it does go over, say, the origin of some urban legends, as many as John Harold Brunvand could find. And some of them are much, much older than you might expect. Some are several hundred years old, and they have just changed form over the years to fit the era in which it's now being told. So after that, I tried to read, and I don't always talk about the books I DNF, and I've realized that I really should. Because while I try not to DNF books, and I don't go into books with the intention of not finishing them, sometimes I meet a book that is just not my cup of tea at the moment, or I know that I'm not going to make it through, or I'm just having a miserable time with it. And that was the case with this. This is James Axler's Earthblood Deep Trek. So this is the second in the Earthblood series. I have not read the first. Basically, well, first, James Axler is the house name used for the Deathlands books. I have heard that there was a James Axler in the beginning, or at least there was an author who wrote a lot of the Deathlands books in the beginning. I'm not sure if that is the same person. I cannot remember. Someone told me who that was. But this is by Lawrence James, and this is from 1994. What cracks me up about this book, and I won't show you, but there's like a book plate in the front. This came from the library of a very well-accomplished doctor. And that kind of cracks me up to think of this doctor who is a member of actually a very prestigious medical association, having this on his shelf and coming home and reading this. And you know, that's really interesting. I think there are probably a lot of professionals like that who just need books like this to relax. And I can understand that. But I just was not feeling this. This is about astronauts who have been away for several years on a trip into space. I'm not sure what their trip was about, but it didn't really come up. They have returned to find that all the plants on Earth have been devastated by some kind of plant virus, and so the whole world has become a desert. Although there are plants that are just now starting to sprout again. But knowing the way these books go, those plants will probably be deadly to humans later on, if there are more of these. I have no idea. But people have come back, and they have searched for their relatives and their friends and gone back to their homes. And they have found that the world is devastated. It's a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And a lot of their loved ones are dead, have been killed, or they have been taken away by different groups. And they are in California, I believe, in this one. And the people who have gone away are coming back to California. And they are awaiting word from a general that they knew before they went into space. And the general is supposed to take them to some kind of, I don't even know, like a compound or a bunker or something where everything is safe. But they haven't really been able to get in contact with this guy until now. And that's pretty much where I left it. They are setting off to find this bunker because things have gone wrong. They were ambushed. But I made it through 96 pages of this, and I just could not do it. The characters are completely wooden. They do not react like real human beings to anything at any time, no matter how awful it may be. They are all like super commandos, basically, even though they really shouldn't be. And you can't just take random people and turn them into soldiers overnight. Like, I realize they were astronauts, but it's not explained to us really that they had any kind of military training at all. But they know all the calibers of every gun. We're told the brand of every gun. Every single gun. I mean, every single one. There must have been 50 different guns named in the very first 90 pages of this book. And that's a problem with the Deathlands book also. It's just kind of exhausting. And it's like the man ran into the house with his Heckler and Koch, whatever. And then Jim blasted him with his Smith & Wesson 44 Magnum. And it's like, you can just say he shot him. You know, it's it just takes me out of it. It's like reading a catalog or something. Uh, this book really felt to me, and I don't want to be mean to Lawrence James, okay? But this book very much reminded me of something that I might have written when I was like 15 years old. That's kind of how the worldview in this seemed to me, where the good guys are good, but they're all warriors and they don't have emotions, and they're very practical, and no obstacle is real, and the side characters will just get blown away because that's the only reason they exist. And there's some weird sexual stuff going on, but they just don't. The characters seem to exist purely to move the plot along, right? There wasn't any real depth to them in the first 90 pages. And I'm not sure, but I think I have quite a lot of the Deathlands books, but I just may be done with them. Because I started to feel that way about some of the Deathlands books I was reading. They were really interesting to me, the first several that I read, but it just became more and more of the same. I don't know if Lawrence James wrote the ones that I read. I have no idea. Anyway, I don't know. I don't think I could have even got through this if it was Garb August. And I knew what I was getting into. I didn't go into this blind or anything. I knew what this would be like. I just didn't click with it, and I expected more depth in this for some reason. I expected to care about the characters, at least in some way, or for them to at least feel human, and they just didn't. Whereas sometimes in the Deathlands books, the characters do seem more human. They do seem more relatable in a way sometimes. I don't know, and maybe if this series continued, maybe there was more depth to it. I don't know, but it didn't work for me, and I just could not make it through another 200 some odd pages, because this is a 350 page book, and even though it's not very dense or anything, I just couldn't do it. And maybe, who knows, maybe after the first 100 pages it gets much better, but I was not enjoying it, so I gave it up. After that, I read a book by David Morrell, who wrote First Blood, which was, of course, made into the Rambo movie First Blood. And this is a book he wrote in 1979. I heard that he was not happy with what his editors forced him to do to this book, but I went and I read. So later on, there was an edition of this book that was released without all those cuts, the original. And people said that it really wasn't any better than this one. So this is The Totem. And so this is a horror novel set in Wyoming. And now I have only read one other book by David Morrell, which was called Creepers. And I really enjoyed that, although it had a weird pacing going on where it was very much like peeling an onion. You know, it was written in layers, so you wouldn't learn things until later on into the story. And so things were very kind of disjointed. And I felt that about this, that this was disjointed in a way. So what this is about, it's about a small town sheriff in Wyoming who was moved away from Detroit because he couldn't take all the crime there. A very classic setup. It's like Roy Scheider in Jaws. You know, he moves out to Amity Island. It's sort of like that, except this sheriff is divorced and his kids live in Detroit, so he never sees them really. And he really enjoys his life here. He's bought a small farm. He has horses. It's very quiet. Not much goes on. We aren't told how large the city is, how large this town is. I don't know if this is a real town. It's Potter's Field. I didn't actually look to see if that was a real place. But I never got a sense of how large this place was, and sometimes it would feel small, and sometimes it would feel medium-sized, anywhere from, say, 7,000 people to 20,000 people. And I really didn't get a sense of that. Anyway, this is about an outbreak of rabies that basically turns animals and people into cannibalistic zombies from like 28 Days Later. But it's told in a really strange way, and some of it is so disjointed that it does not flow well. It's a very jerky plot. The sheriff teams up with the coroner to figure out what is going on, and all the while the rabies cases in this town are growing. So there are more and more all the time, but it's off screen. And the very first thing that happens is that they find a corpse that has been attacked by dogs, and they take it back to the morgue, and his friend, there are two coroners in this book. I'm not exactly sure how that was set up, but his friend is about to do an autopsy on this body, and the body stands up, and like he's already in a bad place. He has a heart attack and dies. And so this other coroner takes over, and he and the sheriff are trying to figure out what this is, what's going on, how to stop it. And at the same time, a Rolling Stone reporter on his way by train to the West Coast to go to a rehab facility in Seattle. 10 years ago, he was in this town when the townspeople drove out these hippies. It was like a hippie cult, a back to the land cult in the late 60s. And now that is an important part of this plot, especially in the end, but it is extremely rarely mentioned throughout this book. It is mentioned in maybe 3 places in 3 paragraphs. And it's just alluded to as something that happened in the past, but we don't ever get a real feel of what was happening with those hippies, why the people in this town hated them, what they were up to, or anything like that. And that's apparently a lot of what was cut by the editor from this original published edition. So this journalist, he's been having these nightmares ever since this incident with these hippies, but his story was never published because the magazine that he was writing for went under. I think it was Life magazine, actually. But we never understand why he's having these nightmares or why he feels the way he does, and something happens in the end of this book to this journalist that doesn't make any sense without an understanding of those hippies and what happened in this town, but we're never told what happened. And as this plot goes along, every person who gets bit and turns into one of these flesh-eating zombies, basically, they're just called an it. It did this, it did that, and there are multiple its, and I was never sure which it we were dealing with until something happened which told us about it. The first it is never really all that well explained. The second it is a young boy named Warren. He's bit by a raccoon, and this is a extremely fast-moving case of rabies. Like it takes place in a day, and the person who is bit seems to be dead, and then they rise from the dead. But they're not really dead. They just appear to be dead until they come back. But Warren becomes an it, and he's just running around through this town. And another thing that was frustrating was that this narrative jumps repeatedly from one character to another, and we aren't always told when this happens, and we aren't always told the name of the character that we are now following. So it might just be a jump from the sheriff at the hospital to another character, and the only thing we are told is he was in his car, he did this, he saw this, but we're not given a name, and we have to flesh that out on our own. That was really, really frustrating. But because all the crimes, there's like riots going on, there's prowlers, and people are getting attacked all over town, but this is told to us in a hindsight sort of way. We are told this as we are following the characters, but we are not let in on it as it is actually happening. We are told about it after the fact. That was really frustrating, and I felt like that did a great deal to kill the tension in this book, because it feels very background, and it's not got anything to do with the main storyline. I think that could have been done a lot better, and maybe that's part of the editing that ruined this book. I don't know. I don't know if I would want to read the later edition of this that was published, to be honest, because this was just not, I just did not enjoy this. I kept reading it because the plot itself was rather compelling, and the characters I thought were done well, and the dialogue was really good. But the story itself was just so disjointed and jerky, and I had a hard time following it, and the tension was just really not there. And the way this story develops, there's like a mayor who starts to envy the sheriff and to be afraid that his power base is being taken away from him, so he acts in a way like to act against the sheriff. And I didn't believe, like, all these people in town are fleeing the town. They are fleeing this town to get away from whatever is going on, even though they're not really aware of what is going on, because the mayor won't allow anyone, he won't allow this news to be given out. So he just pulls his truck across the road, and he has the shotgun, and he's like, "No, nobody can leave. You guys can't leave. It's all the sheriff's fault." And I just did not believe that. I didn't believe that for a second. I feel that if people were scared enough to pack up everything they had and leave town on their own, they would have just driven past him. They probably wouldn't have even noticed who he actually was or cared at all what he had to say. Because when people are scared and they've already loaded up all their stuff, they are leaving, and that's all there is to it. And even if they had to drive over him and his shotgun, that would have been more of a self-defense thing than anything, because he had absolutely no right to do that. That didn't make sense. And then they wind up arresting the sheriff and his friends, and I just did not believe that he would have that power base in 5 minutes. It didn't really make sense. And if he did have that sort of power base, it should have been described much better in this book. It should have been made more clear to us how he had these connections and everything. Other than that, he just seemed like a mayor on a power trip, but he didn't seem like a realistic character, really. It could have been done well. I see how it could have worked, but it just didn't in this book. And the ending of this book, I won't spoil it, but it goes all around those hippies. And if we have such, if we don't get enough information about the hippies in the beginning of this book, that they are very central to the ending of this book. But they are not described almost at all for the first 200 and some odd pages of this book, and they really should have been. If they are going to be the ending of the book, if they are going to have such a pivotal role in the ending of this book, then their story needed to be explained, because what happens at the end, in the context of the first 200 some odd pages, doesn't make any sense. And what happens to one of the characters at the end really doesn't make any sense, given that we don't understand what happened with those hippies, or what their cult was about, or anything like that. We know nothing about them, really. Except they were back to the land hippies, and the main guy was like a cult leader with a red Corvette. That keeps coming up over and over. Is there a red Corvette? Is there a red Corvette? And it just never... And that is part of it, but it doesn't make any sense. I don't think this book was edited to death. I think this was not a very good book that was probably edited in a way that harmed it. But I don't think that the editing is just what broke this plot. I think that it was a combination of a bad book and bad editing, honestly. Yeah. So that is the Totem. The next is a book that I just finished a few minutes ago, actually, about an hour ago, I guess. And this is To Engineer is Human by Henry Petroski. And I enjoyed this, but I have to admit that I really didn't understand what it was about. I thought this would be like another book I read once. I think it was called When Buildings Fall Down. I thought it would be, or Why Buildings Fall Down, rather. So I thought it would be like a series of case studies of structural failures that engineers have learned from, and to an extent it was. But really it felt more like Henry Petroski was just musing on engineering and on successes and failures I feel like this probably would have been interesting to someone who is an engineer. But for me, I went into it, I was kind of hoping, I'm very interested in, say, why a bolt fails. Why one part of a bridge can fail and the whole thing can collapse. That, by the way, is the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. That is, what is it, Gallopin Gertie? And it was, you can see it's very narrow, and it was very susceptible to the wind, and it broke apart in a 40-mile-an-hour wind. It's very famous footage of the bridge going like this with the cars on it and the guy running off the bridge. And to an extent, there were certain case studies that he talked about. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge, the the Skywalk at the Hyatt Hotel in, is it Kansas City, Oklahoma City? Sorry, I can't remember right off the top of my head. The de Havilland Comet, that sort of thing. But really this was talking about how engineers come to the ideas that they get, how sometimes a building will work in one place but not in another, how a failure will inspire engineers to learn how to make better buildings and that sort of thing. It just felt like a lot of musings really about engineering to me. And I just wasn't very interested in it, to be honest with you. I kept reading it because I was mildly interested, but there were parts of it where my eyes just kind of glazed over, and sometimes the writing was a little bit clumsy, and I had trouble sometimes seeing how the subjects he was discussing had much to do with engineering. It just didn't work for me. I didn't really see how it applied to. I felt like I've watched not movies, but TV shows, documentaries, and that sort of thing about engineering failures for many, many years. I watched quite a few channels here on YouTube about engineering failures, structural failures, and that sort of thing. I think that's probably what I'm more interested in, is the moment of failure and how that came to be, rather than musing about how engineers can be better at this sort of thing and learn from it, which is important also. But it's just I'm not an engineer, so it doesn't really have any bearing on my life or anything like that. I was very interested by something he said towards the end, which is that, and I didn't expect him to talk about this, but he said that it's very important that engineers should write and read fiction about structural failures, and to understand how people, even people who are rather bad and just trying to be greedy and make a lot of money and that sort of thing, they don't make buildings specifically so they will fail. It's that they take shortcuts to save money that causes buildings to fail. Or maybe there is an engineer working with an architect, and the architect has an idea, so the engineer comes up with a concept, and it just doesn't work. And just these different personalities, it kind of reminded me of talking about like Arthur Haley novels, right? Like Airport and that sort of thing. And he talks about a book called Skyscraper, which was apparently written by an engineer. And he talks about a book that was written by Nevil Shute. Nevil Shute wrote On the Beach, of course. But he wrote a book. He was actually an engineer who worked for, I think it said de Havilland. And he wrote a book about a engineer who goes to investigate a structural failure on a airplane. Let's see, No Highway. And the other book is Robert Burns' Skyscraper. So that was really interesting. I didn't expect that, but that is interesting to write books about structural failure in a way that shows how these structural failures come to be, perhaps how they are investigated, how they come to happen, or how they happen as they are happening. I liked that. So overall, there were parts of it that I enjoyed, And parts of it that were interesting to me, but the majority of it just fell flat for me. I just wasn't interested in most of this book, so I don't know whether I could recommend this or not. If you're really into engineering, you might enjoy this. So that's what I've been reading lately. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.